So it's unlikely that you'll get through a horror franchise without facing some sort of evil company that's responsible for all of the creepy creatures you come face to face with. Whether that's a pharmaceutical company that conducts sinister experiments behind closed doors, or a military organization that literally makes a deal with hell itself. Evil companies are kind of a staple in horror franchises. So on the 12th day of the 31 days of Halloween, we're taking a look at the most evil and most diabolical companies in horror games. For the record, I won't be including any cults or religious groups on today's list. I actually already did a video on the creepiest cults in horror games, so I suggest you taking a look at that video after this one if you feel up to it. But today, I'm specifically looking at companies that are pretty much responsible for most of the bad things that you experience in your favorite horror games. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, if you want to support the channel, G Fuel is the sponsor of today's video, and right now they have a BOGO deal going on at this exact moment until October 15th, I believe. And you support the channel at the same exact time, so I appreciate it if you're considering that. And if you want to, again, use the code NerdSpaceGames or the link in the description down below. Anyway, my name is Ruben with NerdSpace Games, and this is the top 10 evil companies in horror games. Let's get it. Number 10, the organization Parasite Eve 2. I personally like to refer to the organization, also known as the Shadow Government and Parasite Eve 2, as the dollar store version of Umbrella. Just like Umbrella, they conduct inhuman biological experiments to create bioweapons. Instead of zombies though, they create creatures known as NMCs. Despite being unpredictable and lethal, they continue to create them in the labs around America, including the Neo-Arc facility as seen in Parasite Eve 2. The organization also has no morals when it comes to achieving their goal, which, by the way, may be one of the darkest and most unforgiving motivations of a company on today's list. See, the purpose of this organization is to expedite the evolution of mankind at a rapid pace. And the way they believe to do this is to essentially remake the human race through forced mutation, courtesy of the mitochondria. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that word correctly, by the way. Anyways, they don't even care how this is achieved, even if it wipes out humanity in the process, only to be reborn or remade later, all for the sake of achieving the next stage of evolution for humanity. Which honestly kind of contradicts everything they are trying to do, but when do these evil companies actually use logic when trying to achieve their personal goals? Also, side note, the organization doesn't show any remorse in terms of creating a young clone of Aya named Eve and then locking her away to continuously perform experiments on her with the hopes of learning how to unlock the next stage of evolution for humanity. Number 9, Fontaine Futuristics BioShock. The true main antagonist of the first BioShock game is revealed to be Frank Fontaine, CEO of Fontaine Futuristics, and after learning more about his backstory and what he did with his company, it's no wonder why Fontaine Futuristics claims a spot on today's list as one of the most evil companies in a horror game. Fontaine's company was responsible for a lot of the bad things that went on in Rapture, including its eventual downfall. His company performed human experiments involving the use of Adam, a resource that was harvested from humans to begin with, and most of the company's experiments left the subjects completely deformed. Fontaine Futuristics were even responsible for creating Little Sisters and Big Daddies, both of which were created courtesy of some extremely disturbing operations. For Little Sisters, they kidnapped daughters and missing orphan girls that were then implanted with sea slugs to make them the perfect harvester of Adam. For Big Daddies, they were once men who were grafted into diving suits and conditioned to serve only one purpose: protect the Little Sisters at all costs. Fontaine Futuristics were also responsible for creating a highly addictive drug that was marketed as the future of Rapture, and that it would eventually improve the lives of the civilians of Rapture with the abilities it gave them, but in reality, its addictive nature was intentional, as it was a way to push all of Rapture to rely on Fontaine Futuristics products. Frank Fontaine and his company only cared about one thing: profits. And in order to increase the company's profits, Fontaine Futuristics was willing to do anything and everything from human experimentation to promoting civil war to creating an addictive drug that would all ultimately lead to the fall of Rapture. Number 8, Hexacore Biogenetics, Daymare. As you would expect in a survival horror game featuring zombies that was inspired by Resident Evil, obviously there's a certain company in this series that's responsible for multiple outbreaks due to their inhumane experiments that basically falls under the same umbrella, see what I did there, as other science-based companies in the survival horror genre. In the case of Daymare, you have Hexacore. Hexacore Biogenetics is a pharmaceutical company, a phrase that you'll probably hear a lot in today's video, and it's one that claims that its research is completely devoted to military collaboration and the progress of science. While this is true, the reality of Hexacore's motivation is a lot more simple. They only care about profits, and to increase profits, they are willing to create deadly viruses, wipe cities off the map, and sell dangerous BOWs to the highest bidder regardless of who they are. Hexacore's experiments are unethical as they use humans as test subjects, which on multiple occasions usually leads to an outbreak that ultimately wipes out all civilization in that area. Actually, some of these leaks are not accidental but intentional in some cases so that they can show their investors how efficient their viruses are and the capabilities of their other bioweapons. During these outbreaks, Hexacore doesn't just sit on the sidelines either. To protect themselves, they send in H.A.D.E.S, an elite squad to retrieve valuable company assets while eliminating all witnesses, therefore covering up Hexacore's involvement in each disastrous event. Number 7, Phenotrans Dead Rising. Let's keep the pharmaceutical company train going with yet another big evil mega corporation with Phenotrans from the Dead Rising universe. What's interesting about Phenotrans in comparison to other pharmaceutical companies that are responsible for outbreaks is how Phenotrans plans to profit in the long run and how they go about everything. See, in the case of Hexacore and some other companies, they rely on selling their viruses and bioweapons to the highest bidders. While sometimes they cause these outbreaks to occur intentionally to showcase what they are capable of, most of the time it's accidental or it's a leak within a lab that's conducting experiments. Phenotrans is different in that regard and arguably more dangerous and manipulative. While this company is responsible for experimenting on humans, even children in some cases, to create bioweapons to sell to the highest bidder, this isn't where they make most of their profits. Instead, they profit the most on the outbreaks themselves, courtesy of a drug that they've created called Zombrex. Zombrex is a drug that prevents zombification for anybody infected with the virus. As you would expect, Phenotrans charges an insane amount of money for Zombrex. But in order to continue to profit off of this drug, they need certain conditions and situations to continue. For example, more outbreaks on a consistent basis is a good thing because it increases more infected individuals that need Zombrex, meaning that each outbreak that occurs, any survivors that are bit relies on their products for the rest of their lives. Not just for a little bit, but the rest of their lives, these survivors will need to continue to purchase Zombrex. Therefore, Phenotrans would actually go out of their way to cause some of these outbreaks and then even frame innocent people for the outbreaks themselves. The result leads to more infected individuals, more need for Zombrex, and Phenotrans continue to look like the heroes. Another condition that society needs to meet in order for Phenotrans to remain profitable is the lack of a permanent cure to zombification. See, Phenotrans profits the most on Zombrex, a drug that needs to be taken consistently to prevent zombification. If a cure were to be created, it completely wipes out the need for Zombrex. For that reason, Phenotrans will do whatever it takes to prevent the creation of a cure, from refusing to work on one themselves to even hiring their own personal assassins to dispose of scientists that are close to creating a cure. Phenotrans have no morals and they continue to cause these outbreaks, experiment on people, including children, and assassinate people close to creating a cure, all in the pursuit of, well, you guessed it, profits. Number 6, Horzine Biotech, Killing Floor. Okay, let's take a break from the pharmaceutical mega corporations and now turn our attention towards a company that hides behind its business of providing top-notch security, Horzine Biotech. In the Killing Floor series, this organization is responsible for every single creature you come face to face with, including the Zeds, essentially the name given to the Killer Floor's version of zombies. A lot of the things I said earlier about every other company up until this point could apply to Horzine Biotech as well. They perform experiments, extremely disturbing ones by the way, on human test subjects. Not only are these experiments biological experiments using viruses, but also cybernetic experiments that involve enhancements to the test subjects that basically create cyborgs and other genetic modifications to their subjects in ways that make some of the other companies' experiments on this list look relatively tame. Of course, they do this to, well, sell these bioweapons that they create to the highest bidder, which is a phrase that I'm kind of saying a lot in today's video. But what makes Horzine Biotech a tad bit different from most of the other companies on this list is how their ambitions go unchecked. Like in most cases, we see these other companies eventually getting exposed to the government, and before there could be a worldwide pandemic, a third party steps in to prevent the worst case scenario from happening before it's too late. In the case of Horzine Biotech, that doesn't really happen. Their unchecked ambitions led to almost the entire continent of Europe getting wiped out courtesy of a Z outbreak that swept the continent. Yeah, Horzine Biotech managed to cause an outbreak large enough to almost wipe out an entire continent. I don't think most companies on today's list could say the same thing. Also, Zeds are not just zombies, but they are actually clones. meaning that unlike traditional zombies, they aren't limited to the amount of humans they can infect, but rather limited to the capabilities of the tools and resources at their disposal. The worst part, despite almost destroying an entire continent with their research on zombie clones, Horzine Biotech managed to avoid all guilt, as they claimed everything that happened was just because of a sole radical individual that used their resources for evil. And as you would expect from an evil company that literally got away with mass genocide, they continued their unethical research immediately after the incident like nothing happened. Number 5, Union Aerospace Corporation, aka the UAC Doom 3. First off, I just want to say that I'm specifically focusing on Doom 3 for a reason, since in my opinion, that's really the only horror game of the entire franchise. Moving on though, while the UAC doesn't deserve all of the blame for some of the evil shit that went down in their name in Doom 3, it is worth noting that there were plenty of red flags and warnings that they chose to ignore before things got bad, really bad, and yet they still chose to keep pushing forward. Probably the biggest crime is that the UAC's ambitions were so high that they literally decided to open a gate to another dimension, which turned out to be, well, hell. Yeah, hell. They opened the gate to hell. Yet despite this, they didn't shut the project down right away. Instead, they saw it as this unlimited resource that they believed that they had full control over, and they chose to ignore all of the threats that this gate posed. For example, demonic entities coming into Mars and killing innocent people, yeah, they chose to ignore that and even went one step farther. They took artifacts and specimens from hell and used them in human experimentation that ultimately led to civilians of Mars being possessed by demonic entities, creating some of the most disturbing body horror creatures in video games. And yet, they still didn't shut the project down. Things got worse when the UAC decided to appoint their golden boy, Dr. Malcolm, a clearly unstable, power-hungry, and arrogant scientist, as the leader of the team researching the teleportation program. The result? Well, he allied himself with the demons from hell for whatever reason, and thanks to him having access to all of the sensitive UAC tech and resources, Mars was brought to the brink of destruction. Yeah, Union Aerospace Corporation, rather directly or indirectly, depending on how you view it, was responsible for a planet-wide massacre. Number 4, Murkoff Corporation, H.A.D.E.S. Like with many of the companies on today's list, Murkoff is another evil organization that experiments on human beings in order to create dangerous and uncontrollable weapons. In the case of Murkoff though, they explore different means of experimentation instead of your traditional pharmaceutical company that tests viruses and creates bioweapons that way. Instead, most of Murkoff's experiments involve extreme psychological tests that expose them to other supernatural entities that ultimately create new and more dangerous weapons. Murkoff specifically chooses to target individuals that society itself has ignored and forgotten about, making them people that nobody will miss if, and most likely when, they turn up dead and mutilated from an experiment. For example, criminals, homeless people, or people deemed as insane and, I don't know, locked up in Malmassive Asylum. Their research facilities are basically torture chambers with the amount of brutal experiments their patients go through. In fact, one weapon of theirs, the Walrider, was created from the tortured psyche of human test subjects. Murkoff combines science and the supernatural to create weapons of mass destruction. In fact, one device that they created made an entire civilization go crazy with hallucinations that essentially made them see and think things were happening when it wasn't. I'm referring to H.A.D.E.S 2, by the way. And in a way, it was kind of a form of mind control, or at the very least, mind manipulation. Speaking of mind control, they had devices capable of that too, as seen in H.A.D.E.S trials. Murkoff essentially turns humans into weapons themselves without fearing the consequences of their actions, and unlike most companies on today's list, Murkoff is never really ever brought down. They continue to eliminate any witnesses and threats that will expose what they do time and time again, as seen in H.A.D.E.S with Miles and the whistleblower with Wayland Park. Long story short, Murkoff literally manufactures monsters by weaponizing human suffering. That's insane. Number 3, MOBIUS, the Evil Within. Unlike most organizations on today's list, MOBIUS is one of the most mysterious companies in a horror game, as it's not a big pharmaceutical company or military organization, but rather a dangerous and powerful and mysterious company that operates completely in the shadows. In fact, most people that have heard the name MOBIUS are either dead, work for the company, or barely escape with their lives and are currently on the run from them. MOBIUS, as with every other evil company, experiments with human test subjects, and most of the ambitions of the company leads to them violating human rights, such as free will, identity, and even the reality of the world itself. For example, Mobius's biggest and most dangerous creation is STEM. This is a machine that links the consciousness of everybody connected to the device to a single person known as the host. This simulated reality is created by the host, and said host controls everything within this reality. If Mobius has control of the host, they can manipulate reality itself inside of STEM, alter and erase memories, and even bring to life the deepest and darkest nightmares that rest deep inside of you. This is why so many people in The Evil Within 2 were after Lily, a young girl who was innocent and pure, because Control Lily would grant them control of Union, the reality created inside of STEM and The Evil Within 2. Which, yeah, on that subject, clearly Mobius isn't against kidnapping children to use in their experiments. Mobius seeks one thing though: obedience. They want a society that they can control without free will, and therefore creating a world that they believe to be world peace. Or at least a version of world peace to them. I would argue that Mobius is one of the most ambitious companies on today's list, as they have the most ambitious goal of them all: world domination essentially. To that end, they have no problem forcing people into their STEM device, including psychopaths responsible for mass genocide, to see what STEM is capable of, and they have no problem taking complete control of one's thoughts, which essentially is the purpose of STEM. Inside of STEM, no one owns their own thoughts. Mobius owns it. And while Mobius definitely took a lethal blow thanks to the protagonist of the second game, there are definitely some high-ranking members of the organization still out there, and if there's one thing that Mobius is good at, it's cleaning up any loose ends. Number 2, Armacham Corporation, F.E.A.R. The Armacham Technology Corporation, also known as the ATC for short, is one of the most inhumane companies on today's list. They are ruthless, unethical, and responsible for creating one of the most horrific villains in a horror game, Alma Wade. In fact, I would argue that most of their biggest crimes are connected to Alma Wade herself to some degree. Alma Wade was born with psychic abilities, and her father, obsessed with her abilities, brought her to Armacham to conduct horrifying experiments on Alma Wade to test the limits of her powers. See, Alma had the ability to attack the minds of people near her and create disturbing hallucinations that ultimately would drive her victims insane. Of course, as a child, Alma Wade wasn't as dangerous except for when Armacham pushed her. Unfortunately, that's all Armacham did, and they continued to torment this poor young girl until one day she just broke and became a major threat to the scientists observing her. For that reason, she was put into a coma, and Armacham continued their research for years while she was put in this comatose state. Eventually, Armacham decided that they wanted to create weapons that they could control using Alma's DNA. Therefore, they impregnated her and created 2 super soldiers that they trained and manipulated into their own weapons. Then, no longer needing Alma Wade, they killed her, or at least they tried to kill her. While Alma Wade's body was no longer alive, her mind was, and she was still creating hallucinations and using her connection to one of her sons, now fully grown, to wreak havoc and ultimately lead to her escape and her reunion with her corpse. I know it seems like I'm mostly talking about Alma Wade here, but as I said, everything that Armacham did mostly revolved around Alma Wade, and their research into her is what led to countless lives, even cities full of innocent people dying in the most gruesome way. And despite all of that, they still refuse to take responsibility for their actions and instead try to cover everything up and make themselves look like the good guys. Number 1, Umbrella Corporation, Resident Evil. Umbrella has been around for years, and each of the founders of Umbrella brought their own sadistic motivations to the company that ultimately led it down a dark and sinister path. The big thing about Umbrella is that even though they are no longer around in the franchise, they are still responsible for the war against BOWs, as their actions is what started the race to create bioweapons around the world. Going back to what Umbrella did specifically though, while they were still around, the corporation hid behind the fact that it was a pharmaceutical company. However, the founders wanted to make enough money to conduct their own research on the side, and to do this, they began creating bioweapons for the military and even selling these weapons on the black market to other military forces. The T-Virus, the G-Virus, and many other weapons were created and sold to military groups all around the world. Even the US government appeared to be involved in the research of bioweapons that Umbrella was conducting, and even protected them as much as they could before they could no longer hide Umbrella's involvement in the outbreak of Raccoon City. Before the fall of Umbrella, they would perform some of the most inhumane experiments on human test subjects. In Raccoon City, the chief of police, Brian Irons, would give Umbrella orphans of the city to Umbrella to use as test subjects. After the construction of the Spencer Mansion, George Trevor and his family were captured, and while he and his wife died, Lisa Trevor was used for testing and experimentation for years using different strains of both the T-Virus and G-Virus. Umbrella's research into POWs also led to other companies following in their footsteps, and the world continued to face outbreak after outbreak after outbreak because of their actions. At this point, millions of lives were lost because of Umbrella, and it's only fitting that in about 4 months from now, we'll be revisiting the ruins of Raccoon City and uncovering a dark secret involving Umbrella, the Raccoon City outbreak, and potentially their involvement with the US government. But that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Umbrella the most evil company to ever appear in a horror game, or is there a different company that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, don't forget that G Fuel does have the BOGO deal going on right now, at least at the time of recording this video, where you buy one tub and you get one free, and you can use the code Nerdspace Games or the link down below in the description to support the channel. But thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I'll catch you on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.